Okay, Hancock 3-minute recap, the language of psychopaths. So here we go. Key terminology in this is psychological distancing. So to distance yourself from your crime or from your emotions, you can use past tense, you can use less intense emotional words, just fluencies like yeah. There we go. So instrumental, another bit of key terminology. Instrumental for psychopaths means, it's more kind of you see things as an instrument of your crime, whereas reactive is non-psychopathic murders. So that the crime, if you're a psychopath, is often instrumental. It's like an instrument to improving your situation. It's kind of more cold-hearted and more planned than the reactive, which non-psychopathic murderers might be. A husband or wife stabs the other in the kitchen in the middle of an argument. It's reactive to something. So instrumental is more kind of cold. Again, more kind of psychological distance from it. Words of causality: because, since, and so. That's words of causality. Because of that, since, so, she had to die. Because of that, since, otherwise, she'd be alive, and my life wouldn't be as good. So those kinds of words crop up more. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs: basic psychological needs, physiological needs such as food, drink, alcohol, and sex. No need for self-actualization. So, in other words, it's not an intellectual thing. They don't want. They're narcissistic and grandiose, so that they only really need the basic needs rather than the higher needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They don't need to get up there. They're just primitive individuals, which is why hungry like the wolf, primitive and predatory. The wolf main aim is hungry, so it's going to go kill something, and that's all they're bothered about, not these top needs that we get to as we start going to the opera and needing more cultural satisfaction and those kind of things. Okay, so achieving one's full potential right at the top there, whereas your basic needs are down here, and that's where the psychopaths tend to wallow. Okay, so backgrounds of the study: psychopaths have specific combinations of cognitive, social, emotional characteristics that differentiate them from the population. Hare said that. Psychopaths are thought to comprise 1% of the general population. Hare found studies of psychophysiology, neurology, and behaviour showing that psychopaths exhibit a wholly selfish orientation, profound moral and emotional deficits. So selfish, moral and emotional deficits. And previous research found biological underpinnings among psychopaths, so some evidence of almost nature, so structural and functioning abnormalities of the brain. So reduced grey matter in the frontal and temporal areas. So in other words, your frontal lobe and your temporal areas, which are very kind of thinking and emotional and human, they had lower activity and reduced areas there. And Rain found anomalies in the prefrontal cortex, so we'll look at that later in the year, actually, the Rain study. Key question is, can we tell if a person is a psychopath or not? This study suggests it's possible from the way that they speak, because language and thoughts from the cognitive perspective are seen as one and the same. So the underlying cognitive emotional processes are revealed through what people say. Your words determine your thoughts. Something for evaluation there, it might not. So the aims: examine the language characteristics of the psychopaths, their instrumental nature. They view the world and others as in an instrumental manner, so mentioned that before. The cause and effect statements are kind of cold statements that, so because they had looked at me funny in the pub, I had to murder them, or I had to stab them. Okay, because since that she was no longer gonna trust me, then she had to die. So those cause and effect kind of statements are instrumental. So yeah, they're unique. It's not just in describing their crime. I guess it's in other descriptions of relationships and of people around them. Their unique material and socio-emotional needs. So socio-emotional, their social emotional needs. Tend to satisfy the basic physiological material needs, yes, as we've mentioned. E.g., psychopaths would make more semantic references, to these needs. So are they going to refer more in these conversations that are recorded in this study to these needs compared to the average, to the non-psychopaths? And their emotional deficit. Thought to have a deficit in their ability to recognise emotions themselves and the emotions of others. Would psychopaths produce more disfluencies and reflect psychological distancing? Yes. So they are when they're describing the emotions of others. If you ask a psychopath, and how do you think that made her feel? They might start going, well, you see, well, she didn't do that, or they wouldn't be able to understand, they wouldn't have this emotional insight into the people around them. Self-reports, quasi and correlation are all used. Psychopathy measured using Hare's checklist, which is a classic checklist, and then the semi-structured open interviews, but they're using the stepwise interview technique to gather data on the language of psychopaths. So it's simply an interview technique that allows you to walk through it with psychopaths, or with the murderers. The narratives were subsequently transcribed and analysed through content analysis. So that's literally analysing the content of the interviews using these two, the W matrix and the DAL. Participants: 14 psychos, 38 non-psychos, 52 in total, all committed murder. They're all murderers, imprisoned in Canada, all admitted to their crime, volunteered to take part in the study. Mean age at the time of the murder was 28.9 years. 8 convictions, 16% for first-degree murder, 32% convictions for second-degree murder, and 10% for manslaughter. So you can see from those figures that most of the convictions, we're talking second-degree murder rather than first. Procedure: once consent was gained, all underwent the Hare's test. The test has factor 1, the interpersonal affective traits, such as superficial trial. So if you want to see or have a go at Hare's PCLR test, then it is online. You can have a go at it. And the antisocial parts as well. So it measures in those two ways. The PCLR assessments either conducted by extensively trained prison psychologists or one of the researchers who was well trained in the coding of the PCLR. Inter-rate reliability showed significant positive correlation. So they will have checked the assessment of those of the outputs. They'll have checked that with 2 of them, and they agreed. So very significant positive correlation. Cut-off score of 25, justified by previous research. So they have to make a cut-off point somewhere where if you score if you've done certain things, they say, right, that group we're calling the psychopaths, this group we're calling the non-psychopaths. So that resulted in 14 psychopaths and 38 non-psychopaths. Interviewed independently, audio taped, asked to describe their homicide offensives in as much detail as possible from beginning to end, approximately 25 minutes. Interviews were blind to whether they were psychopaths or not. It was transcribed, analysed using the 2, so the speech and the emotional properties of the language. So this is converting the qualitative data into quantitative data and counting the differences between these. Interviews of the psychopaths and controls produced 127,000 words. There was no significant differences in the average number of words produced by the psychopaths, and so one didn't talk more than other. Instrumental language analysis: as predicted, psychopaths produced significantly more subordinating conjunctions than the non-psychopaths, 1.82% of psychopaths compared to 1.54%. So the cause and effect: because, since, as, so that. They use far more of those words that imply cause and effect. The hierarchy of needs analysis, psychopaths see approximately twice as many words related to basic physiological needs, so eating, drinking, monetary resources, describing them, and controls use significantly more language to their social needs, including family, religion, spirituality. So controls, we're talking about those higher orders of the hierarchy, of Maslow's hierarchy, whereas the psychopaths were sticking down the bottom. The emotional expression of the language, 33% more disfluencies of in the psychopaths. In terms of the distancing, significantly more percentage of verbs in the past tense, so then they were stabbed, those kinds of things. Whereas the controls, they might say, and then, that result, I can't think of the context there. So as an example, if two murderers, one psychopath, one not, both have stabbed their wives, let's say, the psychopath will say, and then I walked into the room and my wife was stabbed, or then the stabbing took place, or whatever. So a bit of distance there compared to the control who says I walk into the room and then I begin to stab my wife, and that is taking more responsibility. It's not as distant as the stabbing took place, or she was stabbed. It's not allowing you to take the responsibility. Psychopaths viewed their crime in more in the past, and more psychologically distant. So it sticks with the non-psychopath. It's very present, whereas it's something that's happened now. It's in the past if you're a psychopath. In terms of content analysis, psychopaths generally use less positive or emotionally intense language. We got high, we had a few beers, I like whiskies, I bought some whiskey, we had some of that, and then we went for a swim. So they're not talking about how they feel about the crime. They're not talking. If you talk to a non-psychopathic murderer, they'll be very often very remorseful, or they'll be very emotional about it. Possible conclusions then: psychopaths are more likely than non-psychopaths to describe cause and effect when describing the relationship with their murder. The psychopaths are more likely to view their crime as a logical outcome of a plan than non-psychopaths. Psychopaths focus more on physiological needs than higher level social needs. Focus more on lower levels of necessities in hierarchy of needs, so those two are linked. Psychopaths will linguistically frame their homicide, so in their language they will frame their homicide as more in the past, in more psychologically distant terms than non-psychopaths. Psychopaths give less emotionally intense descriptions of their crime and use less emotionally pleasant language, so less emotion than the non-psychopaths. Psychopathic language is substantially more disfluent, than the non-psychopaths. So there you go. You could identify a psychopath from how they talk about their crime. Is the study. There we go. 3 minutes turned into 13. Good.